50. Mother bear. Found. Baby lost in forest for 7 days. What happened during rescue? Put everyone in tears. The morning mist clung to the forest floor like a gentle whisper, and Lily Morgan felt something was different as she made her usual rounds through the northern section of Cascade National Park. She had been a park ranger for 3 years now, but today carried an unusual heaviness in the air that made her steps slower, more deliberate. The familiar sounds of the forest seemed muted, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Birds that usually filled the canopy with their cheerful morning songs were eerily quiet, and even the wind through the pine needles felt softer than usual. As Lily rounded the bend near Devil's Ridge, a steep ravine that dropped nearly 200 feet into a rocky canyon below, she stopped abruptly. There, sitting perfectly still about 30 feet from the edge, was the largest black bear she had ever seen in her years working in these mountains. The bear was a massive female, her thick coat gleaming in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the towering evergreens. But what struck Lily most wasn't the bear's impressive size. It was her posture. The animal sat upright, almost human-like, her dark eyes fixed on the ravine below with an intensity that sent chills down Lily's spine. Lily had encountered countless bears during her time as a ranger, and she knew their behaviors well. This wasn't normal. Bears didn't sit vigil like this. They foraged, they wandered, they moved with purpose through their territory. They didn't remain motionless for hours, staring into empty space with what could only be described as heartbreak written across their features. The bear's ears weren't alert for danger. Her body wasn't tense with aggression or fear. Instead, she seemed to radiate a deep, profound sadness that Lily could feel even from a distance. Moving carefully to a position where she could observe without disturbing the animal, Lily settled behind a cluster of Douglas firs and pulled out her binoculars. Through the lenses, the bear's face came into sharp focus, and what Lily saw there made her breath catch in her throat. The bear's eyes were filled with an unmistakable emotion, a look of loss and longing that transcended species. It was the same expression Lily had seen on her own mother's face years ago when they had searched frantically for Lily's younger brother after he had wandered off during a family camping trip. Hours passed, and still the bear didn't move. Lily watched as the morning sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows across the forest floor. The bear occasionally lifted her massive head and released a low, mournful call that echoed through the trees. It wasn't the aggressive roar of a territorial bear or the warning growl of a mother protecting her cubs. This sound was different, softer, almost pleading. It reminded Lily of a lullaby her grandmother used to hum when she was worried about something. As the day wore on, Lily noticed something even more extraordinary. The bear began to move, but not away from her vigil spot. Instead, she started collecting small objects from the forest floor around her. First, she picked up a single raven feather, black as midnight, and placed it carefully on the ground in front of her. Then came a smooth white river stone, probably carried up from the creek bed far below by some long-ago flood. Finally, the bear selected a perfect maple leaf, its edges just beginning to turn the brilliant red of early autumn. These 3 items the bear arranged in a precise line, all pointing toward the edge of the ravine. The deliberate nature of this action sent shivers through Lily's entire body. She had studied animal behavior in college, had read countless research papers about the intelligence of various species, but she had never seen anything like this. The bear wasn't just grieving, she was communicating. She was trying to tell someone something important, something urgent. Lily felt tears welling up in her eyes as she watched the massive creature return to her sitting position, her gaze once again fixed on the canyon below. The ranger had always believed that animals possessed a deeper intelligence than most people gave them credit for, But this display was beyond anything she had imagined possible. This bear was creating a message, a desperate plea for help that she somehow knew humans might understand. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Lily reluctantly left her observation post to report what she had witnessed. She knew her supervisor, Chief Ranger Davidson, would be skeptical of her interpretation. Davidson was a good man and an experienced outdoorsman, but he tended to view animal behavior through a more traditional lens. Emotional intelligence in wildlife wasn't something he readily accepted, especially when it came to making decisions about park management and public safety. The ranger station was buzzing with its usual afternoon activity when Lily burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement and concern. Davidson looked up from his paperwork, immediately recognizing the urgency in her expression. Lily quickly recounted everything she had observed, describing the bear's vigil, the mournful calls, and, most importantly, the deliberate arrangement of objects pointing toward the ravine. Davidson listened patiently, but Lily could see the skepticism growing in his weathered features. When she finished her report, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his graying beard thoughtfully. He had seen plenty of unusual animal behavior over his 30 years in park service, and while he respected Lily's passion and dedication, he worried that her emotional connection to wildlife sometimes clouded her professional judgment. The conversation that followed was gentle but firm. Davidson explained that bears often exhibited strange behaviors when they were stressed or disoriented. The drought that summer had been particularly harsh, and food sources were scarce. It was possible that the bear was simply confused, perhaps suffering from some kind of neurological issue that was affecting her normal behavior patterns. The safest course of action, he suggested, would be to contact the wildlife management team and have the animal tranquilized and relocated to a different area of the park. Lily felt her heart sink as she listened to Davidson's logical, measured response. She understood his position. She really did. He had to think about public safety, about park protocols, about liability issues. But something deep in her gut told her that this situation was different, that the bear's behavior wasn't random or meaningless. The animal was trying to communicate something vital, and if they ignored her message, they might be missing an opportunity to help rather than simply managing a perceived problem. That evening, Lily couldn't shake the image of the grieving bear from her mind. She sat on her small apartment's balcony, overlooking the forest she had come to love so deeply, and thought about all the stories her grandmother had told her about animals and their mysterious ways. Her grandmother, a woman of Cherokee heritage, had always insisted that animals were messengers, that they carried wisdom and warnings that humans had forgotten how to hear. As darkness settled over the mountains, Lily made a decision that would change everything. She would return to Devil's Ridge at first light, and she would stay with the bear until she understood what the animal was trying to tell her. She knew Davidson wouldn't approve of her plan, but sometimes doing the right thing meant following your heart even when others couldn't see the path you were walking. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with a hint of autumn in the air that made the forest smell like wood smoke and dying leaves. Lily arrived at her observation post before sunrise, hoping to catch the bear in her morning routine. What she found there made her gasp with amazement and concern. The bear was still there, still maintaining her vigil, but now she looked visibly thinner. Her coat, which had gleamed so beautifully the day before, now appeared dull and unkempt. It was clear that the animal hadn't left her post to eat or drink. The three objects, the feather, stone, and leaf, remained exactly where the bear had placed them, still pointing toward the ravine like an arrow. But now there were more items added to the display. A small pine cone sat beside the original three, and next to it, a piece of bark that had been stripped from a nearby birch tree. The bear had expanded her message, making it more complex and urgent. As Lily settled in to continue her observation, she heard the distant sound of an approaching vehicle. Her heart sank as she recognized the rumble of the park service truck making its way up the winding mountain road. Davidson had clearly decided not to wait for her report and was bringing the wildlife management team to deal with what he saw as a potentially dangerous situation. The truck came to a stop about 100 yards away from the bear's position, and Lily watched as 3 figures emerged from the vehicle. She recognized Davidson immediately, his stocky frame and purposeful stride unmistakable even at a distance. With him were 2 other people she didn't immediately recognize, but based on their equipment and professional demeanor, she assumed they were the wildlife specialists he had called in. One of the specialists was a tall, lean man with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. He moved with the confident efficiency of someone who had dealt with countless wildlife situations, his every gesture suggesting competence and experience. This, Lily would later learn, was Ethan Marshall, a wildlife biologist with over 20 years of experience in animal behavior and management. Ethan approached the situation with the methodical precision that had served him well throughout his career. He had received Davidson's call the previous evening and had driven through the night to reach the park. Based on the chief ranger's description, this seemed like a straightforward case of a disoriented bear that needed to be relocated for both its own safety and the safety of park visitors. As Ethan studied the massive female through his binoculars, he mentally cataloged what he observed. The bear appeared to be an adult female, probably 8 to 10 years old, based on her size and build. Her behavior was certainly unusual, but not unprecedented in his experience. He had seen bears exhibit similar sitting behaviors when they were ill, injured, or suffering from some kind of neurological condition. The fact that she had remained in one location for an extended period suggested she might be disoriented or weak. What Ethan didn't immediately notice were the small objects arranged in front of the bear. His attention was focused on assessing the animal's physical condition and determining the safest approach for tranquilization. It wasn't until Davidson pointed out Lily's report about the bear's message that Ethan took a closer look at the items on the ground. Through his binoculars, Ethan could indeed see the feather, stone, leaf, pine cone, and piece of bark arranged in a line pointing toward the ravine. His scientific mind immediately began searching for logical explanations. Bears were known to manipulate objects in their environment, sometimes in ways that appeared purposeful to human observers but were actually random or instinctual behaviors. The arrangement could easily be coincidental, the result of the bear's movements around her chosen resting spot rather than any deliberate communication attempt. Ethan's skepticism was reinforced by his years of training and experience. While he had tremendous respect for animal intelligence, he had also seen how easy it was for humans to project their own emotions and interpretations onto animal behavior. The tendency to anthropomorphize wildlife was one of the biggest challenges he faced in his work, and he had learned to rely on observable, measurable data rather than emotional impressions. As the morning progressed, the standoff between human intervention and animal behavior continued. Ethan prepared his tranquilizer equipment while Davidson coordinated with Park Dispatch to ensure the area remained clear of visitors. The plan was straightforward: sedate the bear, conduct a brief health assessment, and relocate her to a more remote area of the park where she could recover from whatever was causing her unusual behavior. But just as Ethan was preparing to move closer to the bear for an optimal shot placement, something extraordinary happened. The massive animal suddenly lifted her head and released a call unlike anything any of them had heard before. It wasn't the mournful sound Lily had described from the previous day. This call was sharper, more urgent, almost like a bark of recognition or alarm. The bear's sudden animation caught everyone's attention, and they watched in amazement as she rose to her feet for the first time since Lily had begun observing her. But instead of moving away from the ravine, as they all expected, the bear began walking parallel to the edge, stopping every few yards to look back at the human observers. Her message was unmistakable. She wanted them to follow her. Ethan felt his scientific certainty begin to waver as he watched the bear's deliberate movements. This wasn't the behavior of a sick or disoriented animal. The bear's actions were purposeful, almost calculated. She would walk a short distance, stop, and turn to look directly at the humans, waiting until she was sure they were paying attention before continuing her slow progress along the ridge. Lily, who had been watching from her hidden position, felt her heart racing with vindication and hope. The bear was proving everything she had believed about the situation. This magnificent creature wasn't just sitting in random distress. She was trying to guide them somewhere, trying to show them something important. The arrangement of objects hadn't been meaningless decoration. It had been a map, a pointer, a desperate attempt to communicate across the species barrier. As the bear continued her slow procession along the ravine's edge, occasionally pausing to emit that strange, urgent call, Ethan found himself facing a decision that challenged everything he thought he knew about wildlife behavior. His training told him to proceed with the original plan, to sedate the animal and remove her from what could be a dangerous situation. But his growing curiosity and the undeniable purposefulness of the bear's actions made him hesitate. The moment of decision came when the bear stopped at a particular spot along the ridge and began to pace back and forth, her agitation clearly increasing. She would approach the edge of the ravine, peer down into the depths below, then return to pace some more. Her calls became more frequent and more urgent, and for the first time since they had been observing her, she seemed genuinely distressed rather than simply sad. It was then that they heard it, a sound so faint and unexpected that at first they thought they might be imagining it. Rising from somewhere deep in the ravine below came a soft, melodic humming, almost like a lullaby being sung by an invisible voice. The sound was barely audible over the whisper of wind through the trees, but it was definitely there, and it was definitely not natural to the forest environment. The bear's reaction to this sound was immediate and dramatic. Her pacing became more frantic, and she began to whine in a way that sounded heartbreakingly similar to a human sob. She would approach the edge of the ravine, look down toward the source of the humming, then look back at the humans as if pleading for their understanding and help. Ethan felt something shift deep in his chest as he watched this display. His years of scientific training had taught him to be skeptical of emotional interpretations of animal behavior, but what he was witnessing transcended simple behavioral analysis. This bear was communicating with them as clearly as if she could speak their language. She was telling them that something precious was down in that ravine, something that needed help, something that had been calling to her for days with that strange, gentle humming. The wildlife biologist found himself at a crossroads between his professional skepticism and a growing sense that he was witnessing something truly extraordinary. The bear's behavior, the mysterious humming from the ravine, the deliberate arrangement of objects that seemed to point the way, all of these elements combined to create a picture that his scientific mind struggled to categorize, but his human heart was beginning to understand. As the sun climbed higher in the sky and the strange humming continued to drift up from the depths of the ravine, Ethan made a decision that would change his entire perspective on the intelligence and emotional capacity of wildlife. Instead of reaching for his tranquilizer gun, he began to unpack his climbing equipment, preparing to descend into the canyon below to investigate the source of the mysterious sound. The bear seemed to sense his change of intention, and her agitation transformed into something that looked remarkably like hope. She positioned herself at the edge of the ravine, looking down into the depths as if showing him exactly where he needed to go. For the first time in days, her posture suggested something other than despair. She had finally succeeded in communicating her message, and help was on the way. Lily, still hidden in her observation post, felt tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her face. She had known, somehow she had known, that this magnificent creature was trying to tell them something important. The bear's vigil hadn't been the random behavior of a confused animal. It had been a mother's desperate attempt to save something precious that was trapped beyond her reach. As Ethan prepared his rappelling gear and Davidson coordinated the rescue operation, the morning sun seemed to shine a little brighter on Devil's Ridge. The mysterious humming continued to rise from the canyon below, and the great black bear maintained her patient watch, finally confident that the humans had understood her plea and were preparing to answer her call for help. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath in anticipation, as if every tree and stone and blade of grass understood that they were about to witness something that would change everyone involved, something that would remind them all of the invisible threads of connection that bind every living creature together in ways that science is only beginning to understand. As Lily watched the rescue preparations unfold, she couldn't help but think about how incredible it was that people from all around the world could share in moments like these through the power of storytelling. She found herself hoping that anyone who felt moved by this unfolding drama might consider sharing it with others who love and respect the natural world, because it's through these shared experiences that we keep the wonder and mystery of nature alive for future generations to discover and cherish. The stage was set for a descent into the unknown, guided by the desperate love of a mother bear, and the growing understanding that the natural world holds mysteries and wisdom that human beings are only just beginning to appreciate. Whatever lay at the bottom of that ravine, whatever was creating that haunting melodic humming, was about to reveal itself and change forever the way everyone involved thought about the emotional lives and intelligence of the animals with whom we share this remarkable planet. The second day of the vigil began with an early morning mist that clung to the forest canopy like a soft gray blanket, and Ethan Marshall found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about animal behavior. He had spent the previous evening reviewing his field notes and consulting with colleagues via satellite phone, trying to find some scientific precedent for what he was witnessing. The more he researched, the more he realized that this situation was unlike anything documented in the wildlife behavior literature. Ethan had built his reputation on methodical observation and evidence-based conclusions. Throughout his 20-year career, he had encountered thousands of animals in various states of distress, confusion, and adaptation. He had seen bears exhibit unusual behaviors during drought conditions, food shortages, and territorial disputes. He had witnessed the complex social dynamics of bear families and the sometimes heartbreaking reality of natural selection in the wild. But he had never seen anything quite like the deliberate, sustained communication attempt he was observing from this massive female. As dawn broke over Devil's Ridge, Ethan positioned himself at a new vantage point that would allow him to observe both the bear and the ravine simultaneously. Through his high-powered binoculars, he could see that the animal had not moved from her vigil position during the night. The arrangement of objects, the feather, a stone, leaf, pine cone, and piece of bark, remained exactly as they had been placed, still pointing toward the canyon below like an arrow drawn on the forest floor. What struck Ethan most profoundly was the bear's physical condition. In his professional assessment, the animal was clearly weakening from her self-imposed fast. Her coat had lost more of its luster overnight, and her movements, when she occasionally shifted position, were noticeably slower and more deliberate. This was a creature that was sacrificing her own well-being for something she considered more important than her immediate survival needs. The mysterious humming from the ravine had continued throughout the night, sometimes fading to barely audible whispers, other times rising to a more distinct melodic pattern that seemed almost like a song. Ethan had recorded several hours of the sound using his digital equipment, and preliminary analysis suggested it was organic in origin, not the result of wind patterns or geological acoustics. Something living was creating that haunting melody, something that had been calling from the depths of the canyon for days. As the morning progressed, Lily Morgan emerged from the forest where she had spent the night in her small camping setup, determined to continue her observation despite Davidson's concerns about her unauthorized extended presence in the area. She approached Ethan's position carefully, not wanting to disturb the delicate dynamics of the situation, but hoping to share her growing insights about the bear's behavior. The conversation that followed between Lily and Ethan became a turning point in both of their understanding of what they were witnessing. Lily shared her detailed observations from the previous day, describing how the bear had systematically collected and arranged the objects, how her calls had changed in tone and frequency, and how her entire demeanor had shifted from despair to something approaching hope when she realized the humans were finally paying attention to her message. Ethan listened with the careful attention of a scientist evaluating new data, but also with the growing awareness that his traditional analytical frameworks might be inadequate for interpreting what he was seeing. Lily's observations were detailed, consistent, and compelling. More importantly, they aligned with his own growing sense that this bear was exhibiting a level of intentional communication that challenged conventional understanding of animal cognition. The breakthrough moment came when they heard the humming sound change its pattern. Instead of the steady, melodic tone they had been hearing, the sound became more rhythmic, almost like a response to the bear's calls. When the massive female released one of her mournful vocalizations, the humming would pause, then resume with a slightly different cadence. It was as if two voices were having a conversation across the species barrier, maintaining contact despite the physical separation imposed by the steep canyon walls. Ethan felt his scientific skepticism crumbling as he witnessed this apparent communication exchange. The implications were staggering. If the bear was indeed responding to and communicating with whatever was creating the humming sound, it suggested a level of interspecies understanding that went far beyond current scientific models of animal behavior. This wasn't just a mother calling for a lost cub. This was evidence of a complex relationship between two different species, a bond that had sustained itself across days of separation and hardship. The decision to attempt a rescue descent into the ravine was not made lightly. Ethan understood the risks involved, both to the rescue team and potentially to whatever creatures they might find at the bottom of the canyon. Devil's Ridge was notorious for its unstable rock formations and unpredictable weather patterns. The canyon walls were nearly vertical in many places, and the bottom was littered with loose stones and fallen trees that could shift without warning. But as Ethan watched the bear's continued vigil, her obvious weakening condition, and her persistent attempts to direct their attention toward the ravine, he realized that the greater risk might be in doing nothing. If there was indeed something alive down there, something that had been calling for help for 7 days, then time was running out for a successful rescue. The bear's behavior suggested that whatever was in the canyon was important enough to risk her own life protecting, and that level of commitment demanded a response. The preparation for the descent took several hours, with Ethan carefully checking and double-checking his climbing equipment while Davidson coordinated with park headquarters to ensure emergency medical and evacuation resources were on standby. The plan was for Ethan to rappel down the canyon wall at the point where the bear's arranged objects were pointing, while Lily and Davidson maintained communication from above and monitored the bear's reaction to the rescue attempt. As Ethan prepared to begin his descent, the bear's behavior underwent another dramatic change. She rose from her sitting position and approached the edge of the ravine, positioning herself as close as possible to where the rescue rope had been anchored. Her massive head tilted downward, following Ethan's movements as he checked his harness and prepared to disappear over the edge of the cliff. For a moment, human and bear made direct eye contact across the 20 feet of forest floor that separated them. In that instant, Ethan felt something pass between them that transcended the boundaries of species and language. The bear's dark eyes held an expression of desperate hope mixed with profound gratitude, as if she understood that her days of vigil were finally about to be answered. She had succeeded in communicating her message, and help was on the way. The descent into Devil's Canyon was unlike anything Ethan had experienced in his years of wildlife fieldwork. The rock walls were slick with morning dew and covered in patches of moss that made finding secure handholds challenging. As he rappelled deeper into the canyon, the humming sound grew stronger and more distinct, confirming that its source was indeed somewhere near the bottom of the ravine. About halfway down the canyon wall, Ethan paused on a narrow ledge to rest and assess his progress. From this vantage point, he could see the bottom of the ravine more clearly, and what he observed there made his heart race with anticipation and concern. There appeared to be a small clearing among the fallen rocks and debris, an area that looked almost deliberately arranged, as if someone or something had created a sheltered space in the harsh environment of the canyon floor. The humming was now clearly audible, a gentle, rhythmic melody that seemed to pulse with life and intention. But what struck Ethan most was the quality of the sound. It wasn't the distressed crying he might have expected from a trapped animal. Instead, it had an almost soothing quality, like a lullaby or a song of comfort. Whatever was creating this sound was not in immediate distress, but rather seemed to be providing comfort or companionship to something else. As Ethan continued his descent, he began to piece together a theory about what he might find at the bottom of the canyon. The bear's behavior, the sustained nature of her vigil, the way she had arranged objects to point toward this specific location, all suggested that something precious to her had fallen into the ravine. The most logical explanation was that her cub had somehow tumbled over the edge and was now trapped at the bottom, unable to climb back up the steep walls. But the humming sound complicated this theory. Bear cubs didn't hum melodic songs, especially not cubs that had been trapped for a week without food or water. The sound was too complex, too purposeful, too obviously intended as communication rather than distress. Something else was down there, something that was apparently caring for or comforting whatever the mother bear was so desperately trying to reach. The final 20 feet of the descent took Ethan through a narrow chimney in the rock formation, a tight passage that required him to carefully maneuver his equipment and rope to avoid getting stuck. As he emerged from this passage and finally reached the canyon floor, he found himself in a small, surprisingly sheltered clearing, surrounded by towering walls of stone and fallen timber. The humming stopped abruptly as soon as Ethan's feet touched the ground, replaced by a profound silence that seemed to echo through the canyon. For a moment, he stood perfectly still, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dimmer light at the bottom of the ravine and listening for any sounds that might indicate the location of whatever he had come to rescue. Then he saw them, and the sight took his breath away completely. In a small, moss-lined depression that had been carefully arranged with soft materials, a tiny bear cub lay curled in peaceful sleep. The cub appeared to be uninjured, its breathing steady and normal, its small body relaxed in the kind of deep rest that suggested safety and comfort rather than distress or trauma. But what made Ethan's heart skip a beat was the cub's companion. Nestled beside the sleeping baby bear, providing warmth and comfort with its own body, was an elderly red fox. The fox's coat was graying with age, and its eyes held the milky quality that indicated blindness. but its posture was alert and protective. This ancient creature had clearly been caring for the lost cub, keeping it warm and safe, and providing the gentle humming sounds that had sustained both the cub and its mother through 7 days of separation. The fox turned its head toward Ethan as he approached, its blind eyes somehow managing to convey both wariness and hope. The humming resumed, softer now, as if the fox was trying to communicate that the situation was under control, that the cub was safe and had been well cared for during its time in the canyon. The scene was so profoundly moving, so completely unexpected, that Ethan found himself struggling to maintain his professional composure. Here, at the bottom of a remote canyon, two species that would normally have little interaction had formed a bond of mutual care and protection. The blind fox, vulnerable and aging, had found purpose in caring for the lost bear cub. The cub, separated from its mother and facing potential death, had found safety and comfort in the most unlikely guardian. Together, they had survived a week in conditions that should have been fatal for both of them. As Ethan carefully approached the unlikely pair, he realized that he was witnessing something that would challenge everything the scientific community thought it knew about interspecies relationships and animal behavior. This wasn't just a rescue story. It was evidence of a level of compassion and intelligence in wildlife that most researchers had never imagined possible. The fox continued its gentle humming as Ethan knelt beside the makeshift nest, and the bear cub stirred slightly but didn't wake, clearly feeling safe and protected even in the presence of a human stranger. The scene was so peaceful, so perfectly arranged, that it seemed almost sacred, like a glimpse into the hidden kindness that exists throughout the natural world, waiting to be discovered by those who take the time to look beyond their preconceptions and truly observe the miraculous relationships that surround us every day. Above them, at the edge of the ravine, a mother bear continued her patient vigil, finally able to sense that her desperate week-long plea for help had been answered, and that the reunion she had been hoping and waiting for was finally about to begin. The moment Ethan's radio crackled to life with news of his discovery at the bottom of Devil's Canyon, the entire atmosphere at the top of the ravine transformed from tense anticipation to overwhelming emotional release. Lily Morgan felt tears streaming down her face as she listened to Ethan's voice describing the incredible scene he had found below. A bear cub, safe and sound, cared for by an elderly blind fox who had been humming lullabies to keep the baby calm and comforted throughout their 7-day ordeal together. The mother bear seemed to understand that something significant was happening even before the humans fully grasped the magnitude of the discovery. Her massive body, which had remained rigid with tension and worry for so many days, began to relax for the first time since Lily had started observing her. The bear's ears perked forward, and she moved closer to the edge of the ravine, as if she could somehow sense that her vigil was finally coming to an end and that her precious cub would soon be returned to her. Davidson immediately called for additional rescue personnel and specialized equipment to safely extract both the cub and the fox from the canyon floor. The logistics of the rescue were complex, requiring careful coordination to ensure that neither animal was injured during the ascent and that the stress of the operation didn't cause any additional trauma to creatures who had already endured so much. The park's veterinary team was also dispatched to the scene to provide immediate medical assessment and care for both animals once they reached the surface. As Ethan worked to prepare the cub and fox for their journey back to the surface, he was struck by the profound bond that had developed between these two unlikely companions. The fox remained close to the cub throughout the preparation process, continuing its gentle humming whenever the baby bear showed any signs of distress or confusion. It was clear that the elderly fox understood its role as protector and comforter, and was reluctant to leave the cub's side even as rescue approached. The cub itself appeared to be in remarkably good health considering its week-long ordeal. Ethan's preliminary examination revealed no obvious injuries, and the baby bear's behavior suggested that it had been well fed and cared for during its time in the canyon. The fox had somehow managed to find food sources and water within the confined space of the ravine, sharing these resources with its young charge and ensuring the cub's survival against overwhelming odds. The ascent from the canyon floor required multiple trips and careful coordination between the rescue team members. The cub was secured in a specially designed animal carrier that would protect it during the vertical journey, while allowing the fox to remain close enough to provide comfort through continued physical contact and vocalizations. The fox, despite its blindness and advanced age, seemed to understand that the rescue was in progress and cooperated fully with the human handlers. As the rescue basket containing both animals was slowly raised toward the surface, the mother bear's behavior became increasingly animated. She paced back and forth along the edge of the ravine, releasing calls that were completely different from the mournful sounds she had been making throughout her vigil. These new vocalizations were filled with excitement and anticipation, the unmistakable sounds of a mother preparing to be reunited with her lost child. The moment when the rescue basket finally reached the surface and the cub was released into the forest clearing was one that none of the witnesses would ever forget. The baby bear immediately began calling for its mother, and the response was instantaneous and overwhelming. The massive female rushed toward her cub with a speed and grace that belied her size, gathering the small animal into her protective embrace with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of everyone present. The reunion between mother and cub was intensely emotional, filled with nuzzling, gentle vocalizations and the kind of physical closeness that spoke to the deep bonds that exist within bear families. The cub seemed to melt into its mother's embrace, clearly relieved to be back where it belonged after its terrifying ordeal in the canyon. The mother bear examined every inch of her baby, checking for injuries and reassuring herself that her precious cub was truly safe and unharmed. But what happened next was perhaps even more remarkable than the reunion itself. Instead of immediately leading her cub away from the area, as everyone expected, the mother bear turned her attention to the elderly fox that had been carefully placed in a comfortable resting area nearby. The massive bear approached the small, blind creature with the same gentleness she had shown her own cub and began to nuzzle the fox with obvious affection and gratitude. The fox responded to the bear's attention with a series of soft chirping sounds that seemed to convey both satisfaction and farewell. It was as if the two animals were acknowledging the extraordinary bond that had formed between them during their time of shared crisis, and expressing their mutual appreciation for the care and companionship they had provided each other. The scene was so profoundly moving that even Ethan, with all his years of professional experience, found himself struggling to maintain his composure. Lily watched this interspecies farewell with a sense of wonder that would stay with her for the rest of her life. She had always believed that animals possessed emotional depths that humans rarely recognized or understood, but witnessing this display of gratitude and affection between a bear and a fox challenged even her most optimistic assumptions about wildlife behavior. The natural world was revealing secrets that science was only beginning to appreciate, mysteries of connection and compassion that transcended the boundaries humans had traditionally drawn between different species. The veterinary team's examination of both animals revealed the full extent of the miracle that had taken place in Devil's Canyon. The cub was indeed in excellent health, showing no signs of malnutrition or dehydration despite its week-long separation from its mother. The fox, while clearly elderly and suffering from the blindness that had probably made it vulnerable to falling into the canyon in the first place, had somehow managed to locate food and water sources that had sustained both animals throughout their ordeal. More remarkably, the fox had created an elaborate system of care that went far beyond simple survival. The moss-lined nest where Ethan had found them sleeping had been carefully constructed to provide maximum warmth and comfort. Small caches of food had been hidden in various locations around their shelter, suggesting that the fox had been planning for a potentially extended stay in the canyon. Most touching of all, the fox had developed a routine of humming and gentle physical contact that had kept the cub calm and emotionally stable throughout what must have been a terrifying experience for such a young animal. As the day progressed and the immediate crisis passed, the focus shifted to determining the best long-term care for both animals. The mother bear and her cub would obviously be allowed to return to their natural habitat, where they could resume their normal life patterns without further human interference. The fox, however, presented a more complex situation. Its blindness and advanced age made survival in the wild extremely challenging, even under normal circumstances. After extensive consultation with wildlife rehabilitation specialists, the decision was made to transport the fox to a specialized sanctuary where it could receive the medical care and protected environment it needed to live out its remaining years in comfort and safety. The sanctuary, located about 2 hours from the park, specialized in caring for elderly and disabled wildlife that could no longer survive independently in their natural habitats. The preparation for the fox's departure was handled with the same care and attention that had characterized the entire rescue operation. The elderly animal was placed in a comfortable transport carrier that would minimize stress during the journey, and arrangements were made for immediate veterinary care upon arrival at the sanctuary. The sanctuary staff had been briefed on the fox's extraordinary story and were prepared to provide the specialized attention that such a remarkable animal deserved. But before the fox could be transported to its new home, there was one final moment that captured the hearts of everyone present. As the transport carrier was being loaded into the vehicle, the mother bear approached one last time, bringing her cub with her. The 3 animals, bear mother, bear cub, and elderly fox, shared a quiet moment together that seemed to acknowledge the profound experience they had shared and the bonds that had been formed during their time of crisis. The fox's gentle humming filled the air one last time as the bear family said their farewells, and even the cub seemed to understand the significance of the moment, nuzzling against the carrier in a gesture that looked remarkably like gratitude. It was a scene that spoke to the deep emotional intelligence of all 3 animals, and to the capacity for love and appreciation that exists throughout the natural world. As the transport vehicle disappeared down the mountain road carrying the fox to its new sanctuary home, the bear family melted back into the forest, resuming their natural life patterns as if the extraordinary events of the past week had been nothing more than a brief interruption in their normal routine. But for the humans who had witnessed this remarkable story unfold, nothing would ever be quite the same again. The impact of the Devil's Canyon rescue extended far beyond the immediate participants, rippling outward through the scientific community and the broader public in ways that no one could have anticipated. Ethan Marshall found himself at the center of a paradigm shift in how a wildlife behavior was understood and studied, his detailed documentation of the rescue becoming the foundation for new research into interspecies relationships and animal emotional intelligence. The story challenged fundamental assumptions about animal cognition and social behavior, providing concrete evidence that wildlife possessed capacities for compassion, planning, and communication that had been largely unrecognized by traditional scientific approaches. Universities began developing new research programs focused on studying the emotional lives of animals, and wildlife management practices started incorporating more nuanced understandings of animal behavior and needs. Lily Morgan's role in recognizing and advocating for the bear's attempts at communication became a powerful example of the importance of intuitive observation in wildlife work. Her willingness to trust her instincts and advocate for a different interpretation of animal behavior had been crucial to the successful outcome of the rescue, and her story inspired a new generation of wildlife professionals to approach their work with greater openness to the emotional and intellectual complexity of the animals they studied. The sanctuary where the fox had been taken reported regular updates on its progress and well-being, describing how the elderly animal had adapted quickly to its new environment and seemed to thrive in the company of other rescued wildlife. The fox's caretakers noted that it continued its gentle humming behavior, particularly when interacting with younger animals at the sanctuary, suggesting that its nurturing instincts remained strong even in its new surroundings. Perhaps most remarkably, the bear family was occasionally spotted in the area around Devil's Canyon in the months following the rescue, suggesting that they had not been traumatized by their experience, but had instead incorporated it into their understanding of their territory and their relationship with the humans who shared their environment. The mother bear's behavior toward park rangers and researchers became noticeably more tolerant, as if she understood that humans could be allies rather than threats when the situation called for cooperation. The arranged objects that the mother bear had placed to point toward the ravine remained in their positions for several weeks after the rescue, becoming an unofficial memorial to the extraordinary events that had taken place there. Visitors to the area often commented on the strange arrangement of natural objects, not knowing the full story of their significance, but somehow sensing that they marked a place where something important had happened. Eventually, the elements reclaimed the feather, stone, leaf, pine cone, and piece of bark, scattering them back into the forest where they had originally been found. But the memory of what they had represented, a desperate mother's attempt to communicate across species barriers to save her child, remained vivid in the minds of everyone who had witnessed their deliberate arrangement and understood their meaning. The scientific papers that emerged from the Devil's Canyon rescue became foundational texts in the emerging field of animal emotional intelligence research. Ethan's detailed documentation of the fox's caregiving behaviors, the bear's communication attempts, and the complex interspecies relationships that had developed during the crisis provided researchers with unprecedented insights into the hidden depths of wildlife social behavior. But perhaps the most important legacy of the rescue was the way it changed how the people involved thought about their relationship with the natural world. They had witnessed first-hand evidence that animals possessed emotional lives every bit as complex and meaningful as those of humans, that wildlife was capable of acts of compassion and sacrifice that challenged every assumption about the supposed superiority of human consciousness and moral capacity. The story became a powerful reminder that the natural world was filled with mysteries and wonders that human science was only beginning to understand, that every forest and mountain and canyon held secrets of connection and compassion that were waiting to be discovered by those who approached wildlife with respect, patience, and an open heart. As autumn settled over Devil's Canyon and the forest began its annual transformation into a tapestry of gold and crimson, the site of the rescue took on an almost sacred quality for those who knew its history. The ravine that had once seemed like a place of danger and separation had been revealed as a sanctuary where the most unlikely friendships could flourish, and where the barriers between species could dissolve in the face of mutual need and care. The final chapter of the Devil's Canyon story unfolded quietly over the months and years that followed, as the bear family continued to thrive in their mountain home, and the elderly fox lived out its remaining days in the comfort and safety of the sanctuary. The rescue had not only saved 2 lives, it had opened a window into the hidden emotional landscape of the animal kingdom, revealing depths of feeling and intelligence that would forever change how humans understood their place in the broader community of life on Earth. The transformation in Ethan Marshall's worldview was perhaps the most dramatic of all the changes wrought by the Devil's Canyon rescue. The wildlife biologist who had arrived at the scene prepared to tranquilize and relocate a confused bear found himself fundamentally altered by what he had witnessed in the depths of the canyon. His subsequent career became dedicated to studying and documenting the emotional lives of animals, and his work helped establish new protocols for wildlife management that took into account the complex social and emotional needs of wild creatures. Ethan often reflected on the moment when he had first made eye contact with the mother bear, remembering the profound sense of communication that had passed between them. That moment had shattered his scientific skepticism and opened his heart to possibilities he had never imagined. The bear's desperate vigil, her careful arrangement of objects to create a message, her patient guidance of the human rescuers to the exact location where help was needed, all of these behaviors spoke to a level of intelligence and intentionality that challenged everything he had been taught about animal cognition. The elderly fox's story became equally transformative for everyone involved in the rescue. The sanctuary staff reported that the blind animal had become something of a legend among wildlife rehabilitation specialists, known for its gentle nature and its remarkable ability to comfort other injured and traumatized animals. The fox's humming behavior, which had sustained the bear cub through 7 terrifying days in the canyon, continued to provide solace to countless other creatures who found themselves far from home and family. Visitors to the sanctuary often commented on the peaceful atmosphere that seemed to surround the fox's enclosure, and many reported feeling a sense of calm and connection that they struggled to put into words. The fox had become a living symbol of the healing power of compassion, proof that even the most vulnerable creatures could find ways to care for others and create beauty in the midst of hardship and uncertainty. The bear cub grew strong and healthy under its mother's continued care, and researchers who occasionally observed the family noted that the young animal displayed an unusually calm and confident demeanor, as if its early experience of being cared for by an unlikely guardian had given it a deeper understanding of the interconnectedness of all living things. The cub's behavior toward other species was notably gentle and curious, rather than fearful or aggressive, suggesting that its time with the fox had left lasting positive impacts on its social development. The mother bear's behavior also showed lasting changes from her experience during the crisis. Park rangers noted that she seemed more aware of human presence in her territory, not fearful or aggressive, but alert and responsive, in ways that suggested she understood that humans could be allies when circumstances required cooperation. Her willingness to communicate across species barriers during her desperate vigil had apparently created a lasting shift in how she perceived the relationship between her family and the human community that shared their mountain home. Lily Morgan's career as a park ranger was forever changed by her role in recognizing and advocating for the bear's communication attempts. Her willingness to trust her intuitive understanding of animal behavior, even in the face of professional skepticism, had been crucial to the successful outcome of the rescue. She became a sought-after speaker at wildlife management conferences, sharing her story as an example of the importance of approaching animal behavior with both scientific rigor and emotional openness. The lessons learned from the Devil's Canyon rescue began to influence wildlife management practices across the country, as park services and conservation organizations incorporated new understandings of animal emotional intelligence into their protocols and procedures. The rescue had demonstrated that animals were capable of far more complex communication and problem-solving than had previously been recognized, and that humans needed to develop more sophisticated approaches to interpreting and responding to wildlife behavior. The story also had a profound impact on public understanding of animal intelligence and emotional capacity. When news of the rescue spread through social media and wildlife documentaries, millions of people around the world were moved by the account of the mother bear's vigil and the elderly fox's compassionate care for the lost cub. The story became a powerful reminder that the natural world was filled with examples of love, sacrifice, and cooperation that rivaled anything found in human society. Educational programs began incorporating the Devil's Canyon Rescue into their curricula as an example of the complex social and emotional lives of wildlife. Children who heard the story often expressed amazement that animals could display such sophisticated behaviors, and many were inspired to pursue careers in wildlife biology and conservation as a result of learning about the remarkable events that had unfolded in that remote mountain canyon. The scientific community's response to the rescue was equally transformative, with researchers around the world launching new studies designed to better understand the emotional and cognitive capabilities of various animal species. The Devil's Canyon Rescue had provided compelling evidence that wildlife possessed capacities for empathy, communication, and problem-solving that had been largely overlooked by traditional research approaches, and scientists were eager to explore these newly recognized dimensions of animal behavior. Years later, as Ethan Marshall stood at the edge of Devil's Canyon during one of his regular visits to the site, he reflected on how profoundly the rescue had changed not only his understanding of animal behavior, but his entire relationship with the natural world. The canyon below still echoed with the memory of that gentle humming that had sustained a lost cub through its darkest hours, and the forest around him seemed alive with invisible connections and communications that he was only beginning to learn how to perceive and understand. The rescue had taught him that the natural world was far more complex and emotionally rich than he had ever imagined, that every forest and mountain and valley held stories of cooperation and compassion that were waiting to be discovered by those who approached wildlife with respect, patience, and an open heart. The boundaries between species that had once seemed so clear and absolute had been revealed as artificial constructs that dissolved in the face of genuine need and mutual care. As the sun set over the mountains and the forest settled into its evening rhythms, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude for the opportunity to have witnessed such an extraordinary example of the hidden connections that bind all living things together. The Devil's Canyon Rescue had been more than just a successful wildlife intervention. It had been a revelation about the true nature of life on Earth and humanity's place within the broader community of conscious, feeling, caring creatures that share this remarkable planet. The story of the mother bear's vigil, the elderly fox's compassion, and the successful rescue of a lost cub had become a lasting testament to the power of love and determination to transcend the boundaries of species and circumstance. It served as a reminder that the natural world was filled with mysteries and wonders that human science was only beginning to understand, and that the greatest discoveries often came not from sophisticated equipment or complex theories, but from the simple willingness to listen with an open heart to the voices of the wild creatures who shared our world and had so much to teach us about the true meaning of family, sacrifice, and unconditional love. The legacy of Devil's Canyon would continue to inspire and educate future generations, ensuring that the lessons learned from that remarkable week in the mountains would never be forgotten, and that the memory of an elderly fox's gentle humming would continue to remind us all that even in the darkest moments, compassion and hope could flourish in the most unexpected places, creating bonds of love and understanding that transcended every barrier and connected all living things in the great, beautiful, mysterious web of life that encompasses our entire world.